tonight is Andy Nowicki. He's the co-editor of The Alternative Right, the author of 8 books, including Under the Nile, I guess like Under the Nile,
Exactly.
The Columbine Pilgrim, Considering Suicide, and the most recent Conspiracy, Compliance, Control, and Defiance, a primer on what is and what is to be done. That will be the topic of our discussion tonight, at least for part of the discussion. And he's also the host of his own podcast, the Nameless Podcast. That's the name of it?
That's correct. The Nameless Podcast.
Nameless Podcast. Okay. And The Alternative Right. You're the co-editor. Well, I guess that's like that you have media there. You have podcasts and also written material at that website.
Oh yeah, everything you can dream of and more. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's mostly articles, but yes, we also have a regular podcast that we sometimes post, and sometimes things from YouTube. So yeah, it's alternative-right.blogspot.com, or you could just key in alternative right and it'll get you there.
And I noticed one podcast has the pitch. Is that Father Coughlin?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's right. We do have a picture of Father. That was Colin, the co-editor. He's really the main editor.
Okay.
I'm lucky to call myself a co-editor. I think I deserve a demotion because Colin does most of the work. I think most of the heavy grunt work. But he posted that picture of Father Conklin. I think with the just to kind of be provocative and different.
It was funny. So this book, Conspiracy, Compliance, and Control, and Defiance. I like I picked up the description from Amazon. I'm just going to read it verbatim because I tried to improve on it. And I'll say, it says, Nowicki, did you write this?
Actually, I did.
Okay, very good. Okay.
I'm my own media team. Aren't I amazing?
You're great at promoting yourself.
It's good to be good at something.
That's good. Nowicki observes the ruthless, cold-blooded, patently reptilian nature of the contemporary ruling class, assessing this demonic clack's infernal ability to keep their subjects zombified through calculated campaigns of manipulation, bribery, and sheer psychological terror, with an extended commentary on their contrived response to catastrophic events like 9/11 and Sandy Hook. Nowicki addresses the struggles faced by the proud man who attempts to render himself immune from the maddening, mesmeric machinations of the totalitarian tyrants. So it's pretty good. Okay, so yeah, you opened the book. I noticed you addressed a couple of issues. One thing that was your reaction, or at least the effects of 9/11 and maybe Sandy Hook, and you addressed the reptilian metaphor in this. I think that's something that's worth exploring because some people don't think it's a metaphor, but I'm not going to shovel that on you.
Oh yeah, I'm well aware of that, and I'm familiar with the whole. I guess David Icke is the main proponent of that perspective that there are these reptilian, like literal reptilians among us who pretend to be human, but they're actually aliens from another dimension. I think that's exactly what he believes. I don't think it's a metaphorical thing in his case. And there are other places like it's one of those things you see on the internet. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stuff you can go down. I'm sure a person with a curiosity about this, that, or the other thing can go down all kinds of contrived corridors of the internet. And so the whole issue of reptilians, as what what David Icke talked about, others have talked about, others have this kind of there's some stuff that just seems pretty out there, and I'm aware of that. What I am saying in the book, based on some of the research that I've done, some of what I've looked into, and theorized about, just chewed over more or less, and there have been a couple of different provocations, or I've been inspired to write about this kind of subject matter for a couple different reasons, which we could possibly get into in a minute. But the reptilian thing I just find really works on a sheer metaphorical level. And that is to say, the more I look into it, the more convinced I become that we are ruled by a certain type of person who could be called reptilian. And by that, I don't mean that they literally have a different DNA than the rest of humanity. I mean, in all likelihood, they are made of the same stuff physically as the rest of us. But it seems to me that there's this particular type of personality that more often than not seems to be able to, or not just be able to, seems to have this kind of ruthless will to rise to the top and to seek power and control. And I'm convinced that this type of person, possibly we all have this. I mean, it's said that we have, there's a certain reptilian nature in all of us, and so possibly it manifests more in some people than others. Maybe for genetic reasons, maybe for reasons of choice, or maybe some combination of the two. It's really hard to say, but it seems to me, and I write about this in the book, and I've also excerpted from a couple of different sections where I elaborate on the notion of the reptilians. Our reptilian rulers is how I preface this section, and I've put it as an excerpt, two excerpts, in fact, that I've posted at Alternative Right, our again our blog post, our blog page. And so readers can look those up if they're interested. Our Reptilian Rulers and Our Reptilian Rulers Part 2. So in these sections of the book, I go into some detail about just who these reptilians are, or what makes them reptilians, and what distinguishes the reptilian from another type of person that seems to be similar. But again, my research, the kinds of things I've looked into, the kinds of observations that I've made, leads me to think that there are actually some important distinctions between what we typically think of as the sociopath or the psychopath and what I'm here calling the reptilian type of person. And I could go into more detail about that now, but I don't know if you want to start by me. Should I backtrack first, or should I go on with talking about the reptilians?
Are you talking about their psychological makeup? Their
Right,
Okay.
right. I'll just I'll just take this
Yeah.
a little bit further now. I guess since I've opened up this can, I might as well finish it off. The the difference between what I call the reptilian and what's typically known as the sociopath, and there's a lot of interest these days, you've probably noticed, in sociopaths, sociopathy. There's a lot of fear, but also a kind of intrigue surrounding this supposed type of person that exists. And supposedly the sociopath or the psychopath is someone who uh, has no remorse, has no real conscience to speak of, and therefore is capable of doing anything that we would generally shrink from as morally horrific. The psychopath doesn't feel any qualms about committing particular crimes or doing particular things that most of us, again, would have problems with doing. I'm not saying that we wouldn't necessarily do them, because I do believe in original sin, that we all are capable of doing uh, bad things and often do bad things. But the difference is, when we do bad things, we feel bad about doing them, and the sociopath does not. The sociopath can do whatever he feels like doing, and sort of just doesn't feel any particular way about it at all. He's without a conscience, in the same way that we could talk about a paralyzed man being without the use of his legs, or a blind man being without the capacity to see. So that's the sociopath. But and again, there's a lot of talk about sociopathy these days. But I think that for the reptilian, the kind of person that I'm calling the reptilian, and when you think reptilian, I'm not just talking about politicians, although that's certainly one type of person that comes to mind, one profession that comes to mind. There's of course a lot of power in politics, but there's power in other places as well. So the reptilian type might not necessarily be limited to the political realm. But to me, the reptilian is different from the standard issue sociopath, because the sociopath is, while inclined to, again, do whatever he wants and to not really feel any remorse or sense of shame or any conscience whatsoever. The sociopath, I think, is tends to be a kind of person who isn't really possessed of much ambition and generally just sort of goes through life looking for a thrill, looking to get a buzz, going from one thing to another.
This would be
Um,
like the traveling con man or something,
the traveling
the
con man,
grifter,
exactly.
yeah.
That's can be very charming. That's
Flim flam man.
yeah, the flim flam man.
Yeah.
Somebody who just gets a thrill off of putting one over on people or trying new stuff. They're like, when you're a sociopath, you don't really, uh, you're not capable of emotions like love or companionship or bonding, the sort of things that drive ordinary people to make decisions in life. And so, the only time you really feel alive is when you fly close to the sun in one way or another. And that's why, as I understand it, we often see sociopaths taking on uh, professions that are extremely dangerous because they get, again, a thrill or a buzz off of putting themselves in danger. Um, and then that gets old. They do that for a little while, and that gets old, and they move on to something else. But generally speaking, while an unpleasant kind of person, uh, the standard issue sociopath is not a aggressively malevolent personality. Generally speaking, he's somebody who's content to just, you know, carve out his own niche, do his own thing, and he's somebody that should be treated warily, and of course you shouldn't trust him, and so forth and so on. But generally speaking, he's not a dangerous person unless get involved with him. Then you're going to be in for some emotional pain because you're going to, if you trick yourself into thinking that he cares about you, then you're wrong. But still, the not a man possessed of much ambition, as I was saying a few minutes ago. Whereas the reptilian, the type of person that I am identifying in the book um, as reptilian, is an intensely ambitious, uh, intensely driven, and utterly ruthless sort of person who not only has no problem uh, treating others cruelly and hurting people, he gets a positive thrill off of it. I really am convinced of this, and again, it's a difference between the sort of person who feels nothing, or who doesn't really care about associating, or it isn't drawn to any kind of what we would think of as an ordinary relationship with other people. That's the sociopath. And this sort of person who is going to do whatever it takes to obtain power and control. And if that involves hurting people, then so much the better. And in fact, again, whereas there's a void in the sociopath, for the reptilian, and I call him a reptilian because I tend to think of this sort of person as extremely, well, cold-blooded, ruthless, the same way that we would think of a crocodile trawling through the swamp looking for prey, as ruthless, you know. And this, again, this type of person, the reptilian, is positively malevolent. So it's not that there's a void there. It's there's something there, but the something that's there is what could be called, if this isn't theologically untenable, a positive evil, which is to say, they are. This is a type of personality that ramifies outwards, and wants to consume and destroy, and gets a positive thrill off of doing these kinds of things. And again, these kinds of people, I'm convinced, are by and large the kind of people who rule the world. And I'm not saying that everybody in power conforms to this profile that I'm drawing right now, but I'm convinced that uh, uh, a great many, if not a large majority, do conform to this reptilian uh, description that I'm laying out here. And we were talking before the show about what we were going to talk about, and you mentioned or we were talking about what some of my motivations were for writing this, what prompted me to write this book. This is kind of a different book than a different type of book than I've written before. I've written nonfiction before, and I've written for Alternative Right, written articles, and I've also got a lot of published fiction. But this book is taking things into a kind of different realm than what I have really anything that I've published previously. Although I guess maybe there's some continuations of some certain themes here and there, but generally speaking, it's a departure. And what set me on this road is a couple of things. First of all, I've sort of been a closet quote unquote truther, or somebody who is interested in uh, peeling back the layers and seeing what's really going on or what might really be going on. I've been interested in alternative explanations of various things, what could be called conspiracy theories. Some people think that's a denigrating phrase. I don't use it denigratingly, but just descriptively. Um, I've had this kind of interest for a long time, and I've through looking into different things, come to certain conclusions that I guess I've I've more or less kept to myself. Although I guess I'm out of the closet now, uh, with this interview and with this book and with some other things that I've written about lately. But so I've been studying these kinds of things for a little while, and there's I think that you, judging from the show that you do and some of the guests that you have on, these are the same kind of questions that interest you as well. And I think you can maybe agree that there can be a kind of thrill that one gets when one is studying something, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, uh, this person said this, or look, this from this angle, this is going on. Just sort of almost investigative work. It's almost like true crime, which also is something that a kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. I love those true crime shows on TV.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I've been into that stuff for a long, long time. But you get a thrill out of somehow seeing things in a whole new light and feeling like you've peeked behind the curtain and seen a little bit of what's really going on. And of course, there's a lot of there's a lot of people with a lot of different theories, and some of it's complete bunk. Some of it is maybe has a lot of problems, but there's some truth to it as well. And it's up to you to sort it all out. And there's something very interesting and exciting about that process. But this is a big but. Uh, when I came, I in the course of my studies, in the course of my research, which is more, I call it research, but it's more been this sort of compulsive drive investigate things and look at things and figure things out. And something that I've done just, because out of a burning interest, to know the truth, being a truth seeker. Well, again, there's a thrill to finding out certain things, or thinking that you found out certain things about, some major event like 9/11 or whatever. But there can be a very, you really are playing with fire when you're looking into this kind of stuff, uh, psychically speaking, emotionally speaking. And I didn't really know that. I didn't. I was
Is it
I
like
was going.
it's like an intellectual Ouija board,
Well, yeah, it's
summoning the dark spirits? And
yeah. I don't know if well, maybe it is. In some ways similar to that. I think I was careless in the way that I was going about doing things, because I was just sort of consuming things left and right, and really enjoying it, getting off on the thrill of it all. And then I started to look into certain things, particularly the Franklin scandal, which I think you've had a guest on or maybe you haven't. Maybe it was somebody. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else, but I'm sure you know of it.
yeah,
And most of your listeners probably do as well. When I so I heard about this thing, the Franklin scandal, and I don't I'm not going to go into the details of it right now. But people listening, if they're interested, if they haven't heard of it before, I'm sure you can find out just by Googling. But anyway, I started looking into this particular thing and other events, other allegations that were similar to it. And again, at first it was like gobble 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 gobble. Oh, this is so interesting, and it's dark, yeah, but I was still kind of thrilling to the idea that I was peeking behind the proverbial curtain, and seeing the truth. And then at some point, it really, really hit me hard. I mean, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, and it was overwhelming what I felt. Just the kind of sorrow that I felt. I mean, it was keeping me up at night. I was haunted, literally haunted, by uh, this particular course of study, to the point where I actually said to myself, "Dear God, please let this not be true. I don't want this to be true. I want it with all of my being to come to the understanding that this was just a hoax, and there was no truth to it at all." But I was not able to convince myself of that. Um, and I couldn't deal. I mean, I did fine. I was, I didn't stop my normal day-to-day routine, but on the inside, it was almost like it was almost like a personal thing. It was very peculiar. I'm distant from all of these events. I don't claim to be, uh, you know, I don't claim to be on the same level as the victims, as far as the pain or the suffering. But I caught a heavy whiff of just almost overwhelming darkness and suffering and pain, and you know terrible cruelty, uh, that was just really hard to make sense of, hard to put in perspective. And I think that was a big catalyst for writing this book. Even though the book does not mention any of those uh, allegations, any of those supposed events, but it was part of what you know made me start to think, well, this the type of people who would do these sorts of things, and the type of system that is set up around them. Uh, and again, there's something about, and this was something I mentioned to Henrik on the Red Ice podcast as well. and maybe you can understand this as well, being a fellow Catholic, like the scandal in the church where priests were, it was mostly homosexual, not pedophiles, but pederasts who were molesting, adolescent or pre-adolescent boys, and they were found out, and then the bishops, instead of bringing them to justice, hushed it up and moved them along, got them supposed treatment, and then put them in another parish where they did the same thing, and this sort of stuff that went on in the church, and not just the church, but the church, in certain places, it was a true scandal. There, the whole notion was, there's certain things you can understand, even if they're terrible and there's no excuse for them. You can understand the idea of, well, this is, this is bad, and we should stop it, but let's just, we can understand the temptation to say, let's just try to keep this under wraps. You know, this is bad PR. Let's just deal with these kinds of things, in house, and that sort of thing. But it seemed like what goes on in these other cases, like with Franklin and other kinds of events similar to it. Recently there was the what was it, Jeffrey Epstein
Yeah.
scandal involving the Jeffrey Epstein flying celebrities down to some Caribbean island, and similar stuff happening with children. Um, in cases like, and then what happened to him, how he basically got off the hook, and all the corridors of power, everyone who was powerful, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, they just sort of circled the wagons and did what they had to do to just make sure uh, uh, nobody was really punished, and that everything basically went on as before. This seemed like a scandal of a higher order, because this seemed like, now one gets the impression that the very reason that the system exists is almost to facilitate this kind of malevolent uh, uh, activity, this kind of these events by which the well placed and powerful just get their jollies off of hurting the innocent, and like that's almost like what it's for. Like that's what the system is for. It's hard to come away, and these people are untouchable. They can't be gotten to.
Yeah, when investigators get close, their planes blow up, and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And um, or they don't go anywhere. Someone lodges a complaint and nothing happens, and that sort of thing. Um, and that seemed like of a much higher order, and that suggested to me that in many ways, the the uh, the systems of that are the systems of government, the mores, the legal system, the things that are supposed to bring justice. It seems like they have been rigged, almost for the very opposite uh,
hmm
outcome. That for to positively seek injustice, to ensure that the powerful prey upon the weak and receive no punishment. And that's a lot to deal with. I mean, that's a lot to have to take in and to deal with. And you know, uh, I'm nobody special. I'm just some guy. I'm a writer. I'm interested in different things, and I aspire to write great literature to the best of my ability. But I'm not an insider. I don't know anybody, and I don't know anybody who knows anybody. But it's hard for me to. So this is not an expose or anything like that. But it's more or less like coming up with the whole idea of the reptilians, imagining the ruling class as essentially reptilian in nature, um, was part of what motivated the writing of this book.
Now there is when you talk about these reptilians, these sociopaths. I think another book is called Snakes in Suits, which
Mm.
invokes the reptilian, imagery there.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And there's been a number of documentaries. One is Iron Fish Head about
Mm.
about psychopathy, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's various ways you can approach it. There's also collective psychopathy, how systems are compartmentalized.
Yeah.
You can think of large institutions, whether it's the CIA,
Mm-hmm.
the Department of Defense, or maybe the SS.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah.
you wonder how some of these things can go down, how people can perpetrate such evil, but these institutions have many people working for them who aren't really aware of the big picture. They're just going about doing their job.
Yeah. Sure.
And this has
This is more like the banality of evil.
yeah, the banality of evil, and this is how the worst crimes in the world have been perpetrated by people just doing their job.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
we get a lot out here in the United States where a lot of people just want to be part of they don't pursue it with any passion or any glee or any malign
Mm-hmm.
attitude. They're just doing their job. And I'm
Right.
thinking about all the people that all the clerks and bureaucrats that work at that drive to work every morning, the DoD. I don't even thought of what the U.S. military is doing overseas. Or the
Sure.
same thing with the intelligence agencies. They're just collecting their paycheck, thinking about the weekend, and wondering what they're going to do when they retire.
And I mean, to some degree, we're all guilty of that, but
Yeah.
we have to. I mean, we have you have to compartmentalize to some degree. It doesn't do any good to just walk around all the time feeling absolutely wounded by the grave injustices that are happening all around you. I mean, you have to carve out some kind of niche for yourself. So I don't necessarily think that makes us all complicit or culpable, but I do think that there are cases where people who ought to know better, or who should do the right, who are in a position where they could do the right thing, choose not to do the right thing because they again they don't feel like it's their place to take a stand or whatever. So it's sort of a distinction to be made there.
But someone said, what if someone gave a war and nobody came? No one showed up.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting notion.
But if you do develop a consciousness and awareness of this, then I think you have a greater moral responsibility. If you have a job or something that involves, supporting a program that is hurting people, and you just go, well, I'm just here to press the button when they tell me to press the button.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of that in the military. A lot of people are having psychological stress because they know they're operating these drones in some complex at Langley or out in the West somewhere, and they see what happens. So they go home for dinner every day.
Right.
But that's the same way that people avoid. I mean, how is it that people can do what they do and then go home and kiss their wives when they get home in the afternoon? But again, part of that is compartmentalization.
Yes, and I would say that not all of them, most of these type of people are not what I would call reptilians.
No.
At all. I do think that the ones who commit these grave sins and this kind of foul, awful, wretched behavior of one kind or another, and yet are able to compartmentalize from that. Now that's a different level of compartmentalization. That's a different level of callousness to the pain that one has caused. It's sort of like someone going on a mass killing spree and then just turning around and I don't know, changing their clothes and then walking in and about walking into some press conference and smiling for the cameras and saying all the right things and it's that kind of compartmentalization, or that where lying and deception come so easily. Now we all know, I mean, I think we have all lied at one time or another. We know the temptation to lie, And that makes sense. There's something human about that. But this ability to lie and to deceive at will, and maybe not even do such a great job of it. Like, that's the thing. These people are not, we almost tend to revere them for being so purely evil, almost like what Father Malachi Martin would call perfectly possessed, uh, where they're just immune from any, from good, from any manifestation of good anywhere in their being. Um, but they're not always good at it. And I give the example of well, I in one of the excerpts that I post at Alternative Right. I think this is the Our Reptilian Rulers Part 2 section. I give a pair of examples of that. One of them is, a couple specific examples. One of them is just kind of a humorous. It's just kind of funny because it's so goofy and ridiculous. It's a little dated now, but to me it's still a potent example of this. Was Al Gore sometime when he was running for president, saying he was asked what his accomplishments were, what he's proud of doing, and he of course said, "Well, I took the initiative to create the internet," and it became this infamous sort of thing. Um, and what goes? That's just ridiculous. I mean, that's like a lie that nobody's going to believe. It's almost a careless kind of lie, but again, it's something that comes so easily to these types of people, and that's what I think is really really different about them, and really kind of hard to understand, because we can understand why we would lie under certain circumstances, uh, but to make up that kind of lie, and uh, and be able to utter it so shamelessly, and then be able to show your face again afterwards, um, and not just show your face, but try to become the most powerful man in the world. Uh, that's of a whole different order. And the other example that I gave, another famous slash infamous example, although this wasn't a lie, this was an actual, apparently, utterance of the truth, and that is when Larry Silverstein was interviewed for, I think in 2002, for I think a documentary on PBS, and where he just sort of mentioned, yeah, well, we said it's probably best to pull building 7, to take it down, and so we made that decision, and the building came down. And it was like you sort of scratch your ears, say, what? I mean, did he really just say that? Um, and it seems that he did. I mean, afterwards they sort of threw some PR flack up there, and said, no, he didn't mean that, and tried to spin it one way or another. But I think that if you listen to what he says, in the context in which he says it, without bias, it would seem that that's what he's saying, that they took the building down, and that's pretty that's a pretty big admission to make all of a sudden. And again, to just state it so baldly as he does there, that's an example of this extreme compartmentalization, where again I don't think he was supposed to have said it. I think it was just a careless admission, but it was said so casually, just like, oh yeah, uh, we control everything, we don't care, we're manipulating everything, yeah, it's happening, it's going on. And again, it's in some ways the very opposite of the Gore quote, because that was a complete
Mhm.
lie, and this is a truth that he's not supposed to be telling, from his own perspective, apparently his agenda. Uh, um, but the way in which it's said, again, stated so baldly, so plainly, so in your face, that bespeaks a very different type of personality. Um, And
Well, how could he not go to breakfast that morning on
yeah,
top of the World Trade
well,
Center like he did every other morning
there's
and not
there's
warn the
that
people,
too.
right?
There's that too.
I mean, what type of personality does that? Of course, that
Yeah, because he had a dermatology appointment.
apparently yeah. Has anyone ever investigated that? What dermatologist? What the name? Let's see the appointment book.
Yeah,
Just accepted as face value.
yeah.
His daughter wasn't. He apparently also had breakfast with his daughter every morning too, but she wasn't
Mm,
there either. But the
hmm.
same thing with what's his name, the guy who went to Iraq, Paul
Bremer.
Paul Bremer, right? He
Yeah,
was there that day. He just wasn't. He was there, but he was at the studio to declare Osama bin Laden likely.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the more you look into it, and again, this isn't something I talk about that much. I'm not somebody who shouts it from the rooftops or anything, but really, the more research I've done, the more I've looked into it. There's so many things like that that just don't make sense
Mm.
unless the quote unquote official story. I hate that phrase official story, but it's the only that's that works. It works, I guess, in this circumstance, unless it's not true, unless the truth is something else. Now, getting back to the book, though, I do want to add that I don't approach the book as it's not a conspiracy book. It's not a here's what really happened and putting forth the details of some particular theory or other on 9/11 or Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook is another thing that I mentioned, another event that I mentioned
Yeah.
a little bit, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
Well, it's more like about how does once someone is aware of these things,
Hmm.
or very suspicious of these things, and the world is something very different than what he was told, how it
Hmm.
operates. How does one maintain his composure, his integrity, um, in such a world, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. And it's about how again extrapolating from the reptilian notion the people if the people in power are largely very very bad people um, who would kill us with delight if they wanted to if they decided to uh, with absolutely no remorse at all.
like kicking over an anthill or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, like a sadistic child kicking over an anthill
I think it was
or
Jay Dyer. He was in an interview. He was talking. He's reading War of the Worlds, and how he made a comment. And this is how I understand War of the World. H.G. Wells. The Martians aren't really in real life. The Martians are like how the elite see the rest of the world.
mm,
How they come in and they if you know how the book opens up, how they studied our us with cunning and
yeah,
rational cold eyes.
yeah,
And that goes with your reptilian thing, I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
but don't they have
um
tentacles too in War of the Worlds? So there you go.
yeah, yeah, well, maybe that's not quite maybe the tentacles are suggestive of a
Some type.
different
Yeah.
type,
Yeah. Different type. Yeah.
an octopus or something. I don't know, but whatever type of creature that is. Um, I'm not up on my phylum right now,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's so the book. I want to say that the focus of my book, it's what I call, and I hope this isn't too pretentious to say, I call it a meta conspiracy book because it's not about proposing a specific conspiracy theory. It's not about here's why if you study this picture of building 7 or blah blah this is obviously true or blah blah. Now I'm not denigrating that kind of work,
Hmm.
um, and I'm just saying it's not the focus that I take. Basically, what I'm saying, and I think that it's possible. Even I don't know if you have. I mean, people have all different kinds of perspectives on things, and it's possible somebody's listening to this interview uh, who's not a truther, who maybe doesn't know much about the subject, but just sort of thinks that the official story is true. And I'm not condescending towards people who think that either, just because people don't. Uh, there's no a lot of people just don't have time or the inclination to look into things like that, and so They believe what they're told, not because they're mind-numbed slaves necessarily, but just because, they're doing their own thing in life, and this is just sort of off on the periphery. So for my book, although it's clear, if you read between the lines, and you don't even have to read between the lines, you can, from what we're talking about now, I'm pretty direct about what my perspective on these things. But I think it's possible to read the book and uh, I think the heart of the book is not about 9/11 and Sandy Hook, being false flags or whatever you want to call them, but it's rather about the idea that if we are ruled by these kinds of people, and you know, if these kinds of people, if really bad people have a whole lot of power and a whole lot of resources, then they probably know a lot about how to manipulate us. And I think that's the other major theme of the book is manipulation. Um, I'm somebody who, and again, to just get personal for a second, again, I'm somebody who personally, I think an issue of pride for me is that I like to think of myself as somebody who's not easily manipulated. I like to think of myself as the sort of person who you can't really put one over on, and I'm repelled and disgusted by the idea of somebody, trying to manipulate me, especially through cheap emotional, uh, appeals or whatever. Um, but a man has to know his limitations, like Clint Eastwood says in that movie. We all do have our limits, and it's probable that they are putting stuff over on us. Uh, that that they have power, we don't. They have all kinds of resources, to spend to figure out ways to get people to mold to the ways in which they're they could best be enabled to mold people to their will, whether it's through I don't know, MK Ultra, or that whole going down that whole line of mind control, alleged mind control programs and stuff, which I know some of it's declassified, so some of it's already they've already admitted to having done, or whether it's more subtle methods of manipulation. The whole notion of PR.
Oh yeah, yeah.
PR is just propaganda. It's a nicer name for propaganda.
Just
And
entertainment,
yeah,
movies.
yeah.
Right.
And I'm not someone who says everything you see on TV is just them. It's what they're trying to do to you. I don't want to sound, I don't want to take it too far and sound, overly paranoid here. I think there's some degree of paranoia that may be reasonable. Um, but I don't want to be tiresome and just say, oh, it's everything you see, hear, read, is just them trying to get to you. But I do think that you have to be aware and you have to be conscious. And also you have to have a certain sense of humility. I mean, humility is a virtue, just like pride is one of the deadly sins.
Mm-hmm.
Humility is a virtue, and it's through humility that we are able to overcome, paradoxically enough, to overcome the kind of positions that pride forces us into. We can be, and I talk about this in the book as well. There's different ways in which a person can be manipulated. Fear is a very, very potent manipulator, and I talk a little bit about 9/11. What they call, I hate this phrase as well, but I'm just going to use it right now, the optics, quote unquote, of 9/11, just the visuals. And when you think about it, it was this ultra sensational kind of event that seemed uh, like a disaster movie,
Yep.
and but it was real. But in some ways, it was familiar to us, in that I'm not saying all disaster movies were just to prime us for 9/11. I think that's a foolish thing to say, but it was playing the visuals of the you know there are so many different levels of terror involved, that work upon us on so many different levels. Fear of flying, fear of falling from tall buildings. The
That
idea,
was one thing. Yeah, you talked about how we all kind of the fear of flying and the fear of heights, and they
yeah,
combine the two. That was very interesting. In the book, you put that two together. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you could not get more sensationalistic in that sense. You know, with the visuals of everything we see, and plus the these indomitable buildings that represent, uh, whatever they represent. I guess it's kind of a Tower of Babel kind of
Yeah. The
thing.
Nelson. Didn't they call it the Nelson, the David?
Yeah, I haven't heard that one,
Yeah.
but kind of a Tower of Babel in duplicate. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I've never really understood. Nothing that I've studied has ever told me why there were two structures almost, exactly similar. Um,
Could be symbology there. Yeah.
yeah, there must be. I mean, but it's weird when you think about it. And I've just,
You meant the
I
Solomon
mean, I've
Brothers
read a little
building,
bit of.
right? Was it the
Yeah,
Sol?
that was close by. That
Built,
was Building 7, right?
yeah, I think, and there's the two towers of Solomon. So
Oh, yeah. This is
some people,
Masonic.
yeah, some Masonic thing. Of course, the whole thing why it was built was always considered somewhat of a white elephant because it was built in the middle of a recession. There was
Right.
a surplus of office space, and all of a sudden they put up these two huge buildings under the Port Authority.
Yeah, eminent
Taxpayer
domain. I mean,
subsidized.
they kicked
Yeah.
out
Hmm.
the people who were on Radio Row in Lower
Yeah.
Manhattan
So there's
who had businesses there. They said, "Too bad, sorry, you're out of here."
there's a very
Um,
sordid story to that. So
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so it was the whole thing was conceived in sin. So
that's true. That's true. That's an interesting observation.
so
Yeah.
and by the
So
way, there was a building that was in disrepair and never profitable, and I
yeah,
think there was $1 billion estimate to remove the asbestos.
right. I heard about that too. I mean, there's so many things. Yeah, and none of this is in the book, but I've
Yeah,
come across a lot of the things that you're mentioning now. And I've read about how the buildings were, like we were talking about before, the whole history of the buildings, how they went up and everything like that, and the circumstances under which they were built, and yeah,
and
so
Larry Silverstein's investors made out like a bandit on that, and
yeah,
like $3 billion or something on that.
yep,
Oh,
yep, and so there's all of that and more, and when one thinks about it in a certain way, if it, even if you buy into the official story, what you still have to admit that it was exploited to the hilt in a very sophisticated manner by the the master class, the ruling class. They used this, uh, uh, again, the kind of sensationalistic, horrific, um, all this fear that was mixed in with it. Um, they used it very adeptly, um, to achieve their purpose, whatever it was. You know, to I guess to get, if it's the PNAC thing, if that's just a part of it, to get America uh, into all of these foreign wars. I don't know if that was the ultimate end game, but that's the thing with evil. Is there, you know, with um, with say, speaking theologically, Satan. You know, what's his ultimate end game? What is he? Is he really? Does he really have a plan? I mean, they're evil has immediate plans, and uh, they the, they and their minions carry out various uh, plots and schemes, in their very sophisticated, adept, sneaky, cunning sort of way. But you kind of think, the dynamic of evil. I mean, it's never going to be satisfied because, again, speaking theologically here, you know, uh, what motivated Satan and the rebel angels in the first place was that they wanted to be God, and no matter what they do, they can't become God, and so it's kind of, to me, it's kind of an open question what these reptilian rulers, as I've characterized them, what they're ultimately doing, they're wreaking all kinds of havoc, they're doing all kinds of terrible things, and obviously with no remorse, and with a great deal of relish and enthusiasm even. But I don't know if they know what their end game is. And that's something. Uh, I've when I spoke to Henrik the other night, and I've spoken to other people about this. For example, with the to make it more contemporary with the current events in Europe, with this you know the rulers of Europe, the EU people, just throwing open the borders and saying, uh, yes, swamp our populaces, just come in, and we have no interest in protecting our countrymen. Uh, uh, we just want as many uh, foreign elements in here wreaking as much havoc as possible. What do you think is the what are they after with that?
Um, that there's a lot of theories. I think the idea is they want to uh, destabilize and weaken the nation states of Europe,
Mm-hmm.
uh, maybe to break them up into microstates as a divide and conquer strategy.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to the Pan-European movement, the Caligari plan, and
Mm-hmm.
his idea was to swamp Europe with, I guess, darker races and create a mongrel, a sort of miscegenation idea that I guess they believed in back then. And you create a weaker race, and if people are divided and mixed, they don't have a culture, they're easier to rule. And
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's a divide and conquer strategy. Some people have said there's the organized Jewish community or political Judaism or Zionism
Mm-hmm.
thrive on weak societies because they're the outsiders.
Right.
And so if you have a weak dominant culture, it's divided. Um, they do better. And I think I think the idea that diversity is our strength is a slogan that comes out of the Anti-Defamation League.
What a lie! I mean, God,
you know,
I just
there's a lot of and you have the multinationals, the multinational corporations, and
mm-hmm.
so I think it's a consortium of interests that are doing this. It's the whole globalist thing. We create kind of a sort of this non-specific, globular, multicultural thing, and you don't with a multicultural thing, you get no defined cultures.
Right. But do you think that they anticipated that there would be so much chaos so immediately as we're seeing playing out now? I mean, was that by the playbook, or do you think that Merkel and her cronies are kind of saying, hmm?
At that level, she might be a little confused. I think at
Mm-hmm.
a meta level, I don't think how you can say, hey, let's bring in a couple million people from a different culture and just dump them in these neighborhoods, not expect problems to occur.
I don't see. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, it's not like
Anyone, I mean,
yeah,
an idiot could
yeah,
know that. Someone with an IQ of 80 would be able to tell that.
yeah. And I mean,
So,
obviously, if you send in hundreds of thousands of unemployed males from different
yeah,
cultures into a relatively permissive different culture,
yeah,
you're gonna get a rape crisis. This is happening in India, I understand as well, with the importation of Western media, and
yeah,
it's a culture shock that's occurring. And a lot of these
right,
cultures, they go into Europe where it's permissive, and women dress a certain way, and you're going to get a certain percent of those people, males, who aren't attached to families, who
mm-hmm.
are marginally employed or unemployed, or hanging out all day. You're gonna get some sexual assaults going.
Yeah, it's a
Same thing
recipe for
happened
disaster.
same thing when they integrated the cities in the 30s and 40s when the former sharecroppers were sent up north into the cities to work in the factories. There was an
Mm-hmm.
immediate problem, and much of that problem was anticipated and desired because there were other social engineering plans involved. They wanted to break up
Yeah,
the neighborhoods and disperse the populace and weaken the labor unions. That was good for the corporations, and so
yeah,
there's a lot there's multiple agendas going, and
sure.
I'm sure they change over time as the years go by.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the plan was different in 1964 than it was maybe in 1944. You know,
Yeah.
you know, they wanted white flight. That's another thing. They condemned. Oh, the whites all race in the cities, and well, they wanted a white flight because they wanted the whites to go into the suburbs to break up the Catholic neighborhoods primarily, and that was sort of from what I understand, at least when I've read, what's believed is that was a combination of the Jewish elite and the WASP elite going after the
Right.
Catholics, because they were very fearful of Catholic political power growing because of the birth rates.
Yeah. This was the E. Michael Jones
Yeah, slaughter of
thesis.
Satan's thesis, and it's a convincing thesis if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the results.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the same time, you have Rockefeller pushing feminism, gay rights with Kinsey,
Mm-hmm.
and birth control. You know,
Yeah.
and it's not
It's
that these things are spontaneous. These things are being directed and controlled, and once you have control of media,
right.
education, and all that, it's very easy to. And these things do take on a life of their own. I mean,
Yeah, and it seems like, and again, part of my focus with the book, with this particular book, is I almost wanted, all these issues that you mentioned are topical, and there's of course, it's worthwhile to talk about topicality, or things that are, well, I mean, you talk about some things that happened a few decades ago, but generally speaking, these are topical matters. But I wonder if, you know, by some dialectic, if things could flip and suddenly the predominant ideology could become uh, the opposite of what it is now in some ways. If we could still see this dynamic of evil happening, in playing out in some other way, if that makes any sense. I mean, I think about, I don't know if you've ever read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. The scenario of the book is, very peculiar, but compelling. In it, it's a series of letters. It's I guess an epistle, what do they call it? Epistolary work. I mean, it's a set of letters between fictitious characters, demons, in fact, and just like the idea that we all have a guardian angel who's trying to steer us in the right direction. The scenario in the book is that we also have a guardian, not a guardian, but a demon who's trying to steer us in the wrong direction and ultimately affect our damnation.
this is like the
And
angel on the right shoulder and the devil on the left shoulder.
exactly, just like you see in the Bugs Bunny cartoons
Yeah,
or whatever, or or in medieval plays,
yeah.
through the ages, through all the ages of Christendom. Um, and so you have this character, Wormwood is the name of the demon, the quote unquote guardian demon, who's trying to tempt his man, trying to get his man to be sinful and drive him into hell. And he's writing to his uncle Screwtape, who's in hell. And the book is a series of Screwtape's letters back to Wormwood, where he's giving him counsel and advice. And one of the things that he tells him that is, of course, it's meant to be a commentary on on the human condition and the current state of Christendom and the current crisis, because Lewis was writing, of course, earlier, in the 20th century, when the crisis wasn't quite as pronounced as it is now, but it was still around. The trajectory, was going in the direction that it's still going now. And what he tells him is, and this is where I think this whole conversation about, you know, in a sense, it should be a nonpartisan issue, because yes, we're talking about right wing versus left wing, liberal versus conservative, whatever, and we are in an ultra liberal time, uh, but the evil can be done in the name of conservatism just as well as it can be done in the name of liberalism. And so, in our time, we live in a particular time when their trends are such that a certain ideology is in ascendancy, um, and another type of ideology is out of ascendancy, out of, very much out of power. And what Screwtape says to Wormwood, is this is the trick that we demons use. We tell our humans, our prey, getting back to the whole idea of humans as prey, basically. Um, to those with dark hearts, those evil ones. Um, and what we tell them is be afraid of extremes, fight these extremes. But what we always tell them is to fight the extreme that's least likely to crop up in their particular time. So he says, in a time that's already very prudish and a puritanical kind of era, that's when we tell people really to be on the lookout for licentiousness and sensuality, and convince them that it's everywhere, and just drive them crazy looking for this bogeyman that's very much out of ascendancy at that time. But on the other hand, when you live in an era like we do right now, where licentiousness and perversity is not only uh, ubiquitous but also celebrated. It's mandated that we celebrate it, or else we're bad people, and we're liable to get prosecuted. So in that kind of age, the demons instead whisper in our ear, be on the lookout for these evil, racist, sexist, and homophobic people. They're they're everywhere, um, and so that's the idea. That's the trick. Is we're always driven into a fearful frenzy to look out for the extreme, the very extreme that we need to be least on the lookout for. That, I mean, if those terms racist, sexist, homophobic, if they have any real meaning, in the sense of uh, improperly hating or discriminating against, or not treating fairly, not treating as fellow children of God, people of other races, or the opposite sex, or people afflicted with homosexual desires. If that's the case, then there were probably times in human history that were where that was, so or that where I mean where that was the case. So it's like uh, 30s Nazi Germany. The whispers in our ear would the whispers in those people's ear would be, look out for, the Jews are everywhere, race mixing is everywhere, all these kinds of uh, these tendencies, these kinds of activities that were already uh, on the run, that were already outlawed. Those were the things that they were told to be on the lookout for, to be fearful of, uh, and that they deluded them into thinking that they were ubiquitous when they weren't. Whereas today, when we've got homophilia everywhere, and it's mandated that you don't notice differences between the races or differences between the sexes, or else you're a terrible bigot. That's when the scream is, or what they whisper or scream even in our ears, is to be on the guard against the very extreme that we are least likely to be assailed by, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly what you're talking about. Essentially, you're saying there's a certain dialectic is being manipulated in either stage
Yes,
to
that's putting it more succinctly than I did.
yeah,
Yes, that's
to
good. Go
advance
ahead.
a certain, in this case, maybe a spiritual agenda, but even a political agenda to
Right,
be applied
right.
to the terrestrial plane, a political agenda.
Yeah. Hmm.
But yeah, because all these cases, whether it's so-called gay rights, even so-called civil rights, so feminism, they're all
Hmm.
all based on some basis of a real grievance, perhaps, and
Right,
then they're weaponized, um,
right.
and
Exactly.
that's what's happened.
And that's what I
Yeah.
think we should keep in mind when we're thinking about, this whole conversation is more or less about evil, and how the evil powers and principalities, try to manipulate us.
Hmm.
And we do have to keep that dialectic in mind, because things could conceivably flip, and you know in that dialectic that we're talking about, it's probably not likely to happen in our lifetimes, but it's happened over the course of human history. And then we always have to be on our guard. Whatever evil we're most vulnerable to at a particular time, that's what we're going to be tempted to do by these kinds of powers
And that's why you get a
who
certain
mean our souls harm.
yeah, and that's where you get certain cultural agendas that you can perceive in the media, like
Right.
whether it's the television shows you watch, where how
Hmm.
every white male father figures are portrayed as being stupid, or
Right.
having to be controlled by their wives. In commercials, it's
Yeah.
ubiquitous now. Uh,
Yes.
and the only smart people are either black people or women.
Right.
Whereas in the old days, the movies were insulting to black people and women.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're stuck in this loop, or can we ever get an age where where no one's actually being insulted? But at the same time, there's a fantasy.
We've got to insult somebody. Come
Yeah,
on.
but yeah, it gets to the point of ridiculous where you watch let's say you're watching an action adventure movie, and they'll have some a femme fatale in there who is very feminine looking, very beautiful, and
Right.
but she's able to punch out a special force.
Oh yeah, you see that all the time.
Yeah,
Some 110-pound
yeah.
model, who can just kick ass and just, I don't know, just all these 250-pound muscle men, and she's just taking them all out. I mean, that's so tiresome.
But it's also such a hypocrisy, because no one wants to stare at a woman who would have that physical capability, because she wouldn't be attractive.
Right. Sure.
It's just but it's just that's
Yeah.
fantasy land. Just
Oh
like
yeah. No doubt.
I was reading an article. I guess Talkie Mag had an article about that. How he walked into Google headquarters, and only people ever see the only black faces he sees at Google headquarters are in the kitchen or the sales service. And they're all Asians and white people.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. I'm sorry, but
I
if you
know.
watch a movie, it's always it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And right now you're hearing this absurdity with the Academy Awards. They're upset because
Yeah. That's right.
it's like they won an award. I read an article about that. I forget where I read it, but it's saying, "I'm sorry, Will Smith, there isn't a category for mediocre performance by a black actor."
Right. I mean, if you're a black actor, you want to get a nomination for an Academy Award just because they had to have a black guy in there, or else they'd be called racist. I mean, that's that's what you want, really.
Yeah.
That's not patronizing. That's I don't know. That there's something just about that whole campaign that just is completely. It's just mindless.
But we'll probably, when we get into when we talk about the alt right, we'll probably get into some of these issues, the sort of the shrill nonsense that we're experiencing today. It's a lot of it, I think, is part of that dialectic that's being orchestrated. But what we get back and we earlier we talked about you said you got into the Franklin scandal, the pedophilia, and how it really affected you. It darkened because you found it hard to make sense of such evil.
Yes.
I ran across this article. Well, one thing, there is a method to the madness here, so to speak, or a reason for it. And one of them is just it's a way of controlling the political system, because there is a blackmail system in place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple books. I think that you should look in the Franklin scandal. That was a big part in the Franklin scandal, with Craig Spence operating his mansion in D.C. here that was wired for audio sound, and he would film these politicians and officials compromising them, and then getting control of them. And of course, it's instead of what agency was involved in it, but you can guess. It had 3 letters in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that factors into that. And also, there's a recent book. I think it was co-written, at least edited, by Nick Bryant, who wrote the Franklin Scandal: Story of Power Brokers, Child Abuse, and Betrayal. And this is Confessions of a D.C. Madam: The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail by Henry Visson. And he was he was actually by profession a mortician. He ran a funeral home or some mortician services, but he was a cover for a gay escort service that was servicing people in the D.C. area.
Mm-hmm.
And he got roped into Craig Spence, circle.
Mm-hmm.
And he was blackmailed, by the way. Apparently, his story was he got on tape admitting he had the service, and then Craig Spence showed him his room that was recording everything, and used that to help him with what he was doing.
To get his way with him.
Yeah, to get his way
with
him. And basically, it's just in the book details the integral role that blackmail plays in American politics, and how it controls the system. So there's a reason for this. It's not just perverted politicians getting their satisfying their perverted needs. The system promotes these people. You find out who's compromised, and they're the ones that get promoted. I think we saw that recently with Denny Hastert. he more or less skated away. Although,
Right.
I mean,
We did a podcast on him. We called it the Political Perv Cast.
yeah,
You might have heard that on at Alternative Right. Colin Liddell and I talked about
yeah.
that
But
whole situation.
I've been hearing rumors about him for years.
Yeah.
And finally got. But then that's not. He pled out to this money structuring charge, and no one questions how this guy got millions of dollars to pay off a guy, and from his high
Hmm.
school. And Sybil Evans has some interesting things to say on that, because this goes some of
Yeah.
the blackmail and the illegal wiretapping involved in this goes back to the Clinton scandals, and it was Clinton trying to wiretap or get dirt on his opponents
enemies, right?
and his
Yeah.
enemies. And this all unfolded, and some of these FBI agents undercovered a pedophile ring.
Hmm.
And they kept asking, why don't we go after these guys? Why don't we charge them? They said, no, we're going after the bigger fish, and no one was ever charged. And these
Yeah.
agents had to sit by and listen as these officials, I guess you could say, raped these children.
Right. They just let him loose, and
Yeah.
they didn't let him go out and prey upon even more.
Yeah. And so you can
Children.
imagine the psychic effect that would have on those agents, because again, some of these middle of agents have to actually believe they're out there enforcing the Constitution and fighting bad guys. And when they're faced with that has to be a huge disillusionment on their part.
Yeah.
And of course, you have the case of Deborah Jean Palfrey, the DC madam, where she was found hung.
Yes.
And of course, the FBI didn't come down on her until she shut down her operation. The reason why, because they were using her operation to get dirt on people. So that's kind of there's a logic to this. However evil it is, there's a logic to it. But I think James Corbett did an interview with this Dr. Tujerd Andriga from the University of Groningen, I think in Denmark, and he came up with this idea of kakistocracy.
Yes, I heard that interview.
I mean, that explains it. And he's just basically, it's a way the elite maintain a stable of psychopaths by targeting, I guess, young people to be sexually abused, and this has such a traumatic effect on them that they can, from that pool of victims, they can get a reliable source of future psychopaths, and
they wreck them.
Yeah, they wreck them
by molesting them. They wreck them morally,
and it's like a ritual thing. And this goes back into the Moloch and sacrificing kids to this gods, and this is sort of like a tradition, I guess, in these secret societies of doing these things.
It gets very dark and shadowy.
Yeah,
like this Bohemian Grove stuff,
Bohemian Grove, yeah. Which Paul Bonacci from the Franklin scandal seemed to be describing that he attended when some of these things were going on. His descriptions sounded awfully like Bohemian Grove.
Mm-hmm.
And there they have the cremation of care. They have the I think Moloch the owl, where they do a sacrifice of a child, not of a an effigy, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the stuff is being acted out. And of course, it's adds some more, because Bohemian Grove was a lot of important decisions are taken. Apparently, that's where the decision to develop the atomic bomb was taken, at Bohemian Grove.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where was that? Is that sourced somewhere that you can recall? Because
I heard that source. Joe Outlaw writes about that.
Mm.
But a lot of these, because you have all these elite people meeting, and this is unofficially, this is where these decisions are taken.
All the rulers of the world meet at
Yeah.
Bohemian Grove, and what the what is it, the Bilderberg and meeting and other places like that.
Some of these
there's no press to speak of.
Yeah.
Nobody covers it. Nobody.
It's like the Yom Kippur War was apparently planned at the Bilderberg in 1973 to push the oil prices up 400%, and they got the documents on that.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these events that we think are just springing up are planned. It's again, it's world changing when your vision changing when you understand these things.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what Dr. Andriger wrote. He said the point here is that those abuse networks are something of an unprotected underbelly of the kakistocracy. They need them, but it is so difficult to keep them completely hidden. But now we have an important point. Who wants to know these things? If you are someone who is law-abiding, who is struggling to understand the world, then someone is going to tell you that everything that you hold dear is so as a stable point in your society, that your authorities are completely unreliable amongst the worst people in the world. This is what you said earlier. Remember how the system is actually designed to do this, as opposed to them breaking the law and getting around the system. The system is actually promoting this. then you are not really doing them a service. By telling them this, you are doing them a disservice by attacking the foundations of their life. And this is why when you tell someone these things, they get so upset. They don't want to accept that such things are possible, and their paradigm is being shattered.
Yeah.
And people don't take kindly to that generally, from my
No.
experience.
No,
So,
and I know, and I can relate to a certain extent, because as I was saying earlier, this was when I got really deep into this stuff. I didn't really get, I mean, when I say deep into it, it wasn't like I, had all these facts and figures in some encyclopedic way in my mind. It was just like reading, getting more and more into this, studying, researching this stuff, and getting the gist of what it was just plainly clear was the case. I found myself just begging that this not be true. I mean, and I hadn't really, like I told you, this was before that I had been more used to getting this kind of thrill off of, even if it was disturbing.
mm-hmm.
You get a certain thrill off of the idea of looking into some hidden corner and saying "aha," and sort of like at the end of an Agatha Christie novel, and when it all
Yeah.
comes together. But this was not. I mean, this was like, yes, aha, I see something, but man, I don't want to see it, and I don't want to think. I want to. I really want to think that I'm wrong here. I mean, I really want to. I want this all to be a hoax. I want this all, not to be true. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you look at everything, I don't think you can come to that conclusion, unfortunately.
And we also with things like MK Ultra, we now know that certain programs targeted children because children made excellent test cases.
They were more easily influenced.
Exactly,
Right?
because if you traumatize an adult, he has a reference point, he has experience. They can cope with it better. A child, however, has no reference point. In fact, there's no experience. So therefore, the trauma causes this shattering and this creation of what they think are multiple personalities, or dissociation or dissociative disorder sets in, and that's
Right.
when they get these multiple personalities. And then you start to get into the I guess you can see the value from an intelligence standpoint, where for couriers and information and and other things. Patsies, and so what's weird is when you look into something like Franklin and you start investigating it, like the Nebraska legislature was doing, and I think it was John DeCamp who had his chief investigator Gary Caradori. He was he called John DeCamp and said, he actually had photographs of some of these things. Because they hired a photographer actually to
Yeah.
I think this is the guy that Nick Bryant traveled around Nebraska with, investigating the stuff at the time. And he had said he got the goods on him, and he's flying back. He went to Chicago under the pretext of attending the Major League All-Star game, and his plane blew up in midair.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he was also with his son.
Yeah.
And when they got there, a farmer saw the plane fall apart in midair and come to the ground. And reportedly, the farmer said that a car pulled up and they took his briefcase, and the briefcase was never found.
Right. Just like which is sort of like how they drove up on the September 11th to all the places that had security cameras facing the Pentagon, and just seized it. Why take that stuff away? I mean, if there's nothing to hide,
within 20 minutes,
there's no way you can't encounter a fact like that and not think, well, there's something they don't want us to know. And I mean, it's incontrovertible. There's really no way around it. It doesn't seem like.
But this is where the intersection occurs here with the Franken scandal. There's this is reason to suspect that the guy running was Lawrence King, who was not becoming Republican. He was a black Republican, so they were promoting him. He sang the national anthem at the '84 convention, I think.
Yeah.
But he ran this Franklin Savings and Loan, and he embezzled $40 million went missing, which is a huge amount for this small little savings and loan, credit union rather. I think it was a credit union, and people think it went under because the credit union was actually involved in some of the Iran Contra things with the savings and loan and the banks, how they're being embezzled by intelligence agencies and also organized crime.
Yeah, I'd heard about that too.
Yeah, so you can see where if you start really investigating this, how other powers might shut the investigation down and quash it because they don't. You're opening up a huge can of worms, and the pedophilia factors in because the pedophilia is the way the intelligence agencies get some of these officials to do their bidding for them, whether it's banking officials, whether it's you're working for a public relations firm. I was reading Joseph Trento's book Prelude to Terror, and talking about how some of these spooks got Hill and Knowlton to do some work for Hill and Knowlton, the PR firm that well, the head of it was a guy named I think Robert Gray, and he was a closet homosexual, and they had the goods on him, and he's also a lot of his clients were conservative Republicans.
Yeah,
and so that's how they got him to do their bidding for him.
right. That's the classic way it
Yeah.
works. But something I had brought up when I did this podcast with Colin. Actually, we did a couple on these related subjects, and this was one that we did I think a couple of years ago. I think it was called Perverted Elites, I believe that was the name of it. And in that one, I raised the question: why is it that so many power-hungry people seem to be inclined to that particular type of perversion?
Oh yeah,
pedophilia?
I listened to that podcast actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so that's still something I wonder about because if you were to, I mean, I don't like. I think I made this point in that podcast. There'd be ways of tempting me, but children, no, not at all. And we all understand temptation, but why that particular type? Do you have any thought about that?
On one level, I think you could say the system is designed. I think the system is a way of identifying people's proclivities and weaknesses and then promoting them. And so, like I said, it's a way you can make sure that people with these weaknesses or perversions or vices or whatever you want to call it get promoted.
Yeah.
And so that
is there something about just the reptilian type, if you want to take the term that I coined,
the destruction of innocence, I think.
Is there something that draws that type of person just to those kinds of activities?
I mean, there's that proclivity, and I mean, sex itself. I mean, outside, if you divorce, I mean, this is Tim Kelly, the Catholic, talking here. If you separate sex from unitive and procreative acts, meaning an act of love and act of procreation, it really becomes merely a recreational act. Or else it's like eating a sandwich or something. You're getting pleasure from it.
But for most, it's recreational, like one night stands with women. So,
but the reality is you are objectifying another human being.
Yes.
Okay.
Understood.
So so basically, if you take that view, you're objectifying another human being, which you've already taken a step towards that. The perversion sets in. That is something it's hard to really grasp on, but I think it's something to do with the destruction of innocence. There might be a point where you're offered, access and power and wealth, and in order to do this, you must do this. Prove that you're one of us, and it's. I mean, you get that.
It's almost like a initiation type of thing.
Yeah, like a rite of passage. I mean, you hear about things at Skull and Bones and other secret societies.
Sure.
How sort of this. You humiliate yourself or you degrade yourself in public, and that way you all have done it. And it's kind of a group thing.
Right.
Again, I mentioned, this has occurred all throughout history. The sacrifice of children, and perhaps the demons that the demon spirits that we were talking about earlier might get a particular satisfaction out of the destruction of youth, of innocence. I mean, a child. When you're dealing with a child, I think usually how most people respond to a child is to care for them and to give them instruction and love them and care for them and
protect them,
to risk their lives for them. It's almost like you see a car headed for a child. Your reaction is to get in the way and protect that child, even when it isn't your own. And so that's the natural reaction. There is nothing more beautiful, innocent than a little child. You're playing with a little child, just innocently playing with that child. So there really is nothing more perverse than turning that into an opportunity to exploit that child. So maybe there's something spiritual going on there,
Right. So you're saying if you go down the path towards like if you're single and, what should we say, sexually incontinent at all, even if it's with women over the age of consent, then you're opening yourself up to the danger of going down the path. I'm trying to understand if this
Well,
is what
not
you're
so
saying.
much that. I think what happens is, no, no, not.
Like,
I
does is it? Are you you're not saying it's a slippery slope between fornication and child molestation?
Uh, no, I think that that's a threshold that has to be crossed for some reason. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's tendency for people who, people with if you're like a rock star or a celebrity and you have so much sex to get perversion just to get excitement.
Yeah, sure,
You know,
right. That makes more
because
sense.
how many pretty girls?
Yeah.
I mean,
So that sort of
yeah,
bringing in the sociopathy, the aspect of
yeah,
sociopathy we were talking about the other day, how it's just you living for the thrill, and
yeah.
in that case you just get jaded on ordinary thrills and want something a little more, I don't know, exotic or different or something.
So, it's just one of those things. It's hard to. It's one of those things where it's hard to appreciate and understand because, and most people don't understand it. They're just horrified by it, and that
Mm-hmm.
also makes them turn away from it when you bring up something like organized elite pedophilia. That child protective services and law enforcement agencies and courts and
Yeah.
entire institutions are geared towards actually letting this happen. Intelligence agencies are involved in it, and human
Yeah.
trafficking happens all over the world, and we all know that certain agencies are involved in it for that very
They
reason.
must be. They must be, or else you would it would be getting stopped more often
Yeah.
than it is. Yeah, you'd think so.
There's been rumors about what's going on in the Balkans, and of course NATO is involved in it with drugs and human trafficking, and the two go hand in hand. You know,
Hmm.
so
So again, yeah, the this vision of things where the
was it
very
DynCorp that was caught? DynCorp, I think, was the company that was caught that supplying young girls and boys to clients, and their contract was suspended. Suspended.
that was
But
it. That was all they.
Donna Rumsfeld, yeah, I think it was
Mm.
DynCorp, yeah.
But
So
when you're given that, when again presented uh, that vision of things where the institutions that are supposedly set up to
hmm
protect you and protect your children and protect other people's children and just stop bad things, to stop bad people from doing bad things, when it turns out that it's the very opposite, somehow, that you can't. I mean, I'm not saying in all cases that this is, I'm not saying everything is corrupt thoroughly through and through, but in some significant ways, that was what, looking into Franklin and
yes,
other issues like that, where it just seemed like everything was upside down from the way it should be. That it seemed like these institutions existed to supply the depraved and powerful with the means of satisfying their perverted
yes.
tastes, and then protecting them from any repercussions.
Same thing occurred out at the Presidio, where
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. I mean,
Colonel
I
Aquino
heard all
was.
kinds of things, but
Yeah, but that was when these kids then were died or came down with gonorrhea and syphilis and all types of other sexually transmitted
hmm
diseases.
this is
And
just dark, dark, dark stuff. I
yeah,
mean,
and the military, they have huge daycare centers, so that these kids are access. And you hear some of these other stories, like the McMartin case, where at the time I thought it was too sensational to believe. Then
right.
you look into it, you're like, oh, okay, there's something more to this. Then you have the False Memory Foundation, which was full of spooks,
hmm
founded by like people like Jolly West, who was from MK Ultra fame,
hmm
and because they're arguing that some of these memories were being created by the investigators asking the
hmm
children the questions, and that's what I thought at the time. Back, I thought these are just outrageous charges, but then when you look into it, you realize there is some basis for it. You know.
hmm And
Like
it's hard.
you know,
I'm sure there are cases where people are falsely accused.
oh
I
yes,
mean,
that's how
so
that you mix it in. That's how you
yeah,
confuse the matter, right? It's not,
right,
you have to judge each case on its own merit, I guess. I mean,
right.
you don't want to just because someone's accused of something, especially like when you have, divorce cases where that type of those
Ah,
charges happen all
yeah.
the time. In fact, they happen so often that judges don't even penalize people making the false accusations. Okay, here we go again. This is
Huh.
what we expect.
And it's probably usually the women, I would
The women, yeah,
suspect, and who make those kinds of
yeah,
charges
you know,
against
and it is very. I mean,
the man they're divorcing.
yeah, usually that type of uh, you know, incest is very rare. It's more common if you have like a boyfriend or a stepfather, unfortunately, because you don't have that natural, you don't have
Right.
the biological relationship. So, uh, some of the stats you hear are skewed because they throw in like they include stepfathers, which isn't to
Right.
me isn't technically incest. It's something else, but it is an
Hmm.
incest.
Hmm.
So and you get more of this. One thing is when you try to talk about sex abuse, when you have families break up, and you have the phenomenon of adults with children that are dating again, as opposed to like a stable family, how that the risks of child sex abuse go skyrocket.
Mm.
And what I was
I imagine.
amazed, I was reading about some of the problems in the black community, how the girls, because so many of the women,
Hmm.
or majority of them, the vast majority aren't married, and
Single. Uh-huh.
and they have children from multiple fathers, and they have periodically they have boyfriends live with them for a while,
Mm.
and the amount of girls that are sexually abused in those neighborhoods, I mean, it would just blow your mind how
Hmm.
common it is, and how this sets them off on a trajectory,
Oh yeah.
because they seek protection, like maybe in gangs and things like that.
It's a vicious circle, right?
Yeah,
Like they
and
say.
well, it's the evil just kind of just radiates, and
Right.
you know,
It reproduces
yeah,
itself
you know,
in some sort of uh, obscene imitation
yeah.
of the miracle of birth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And all this stems from people not forming cohesive families.
Right.
This isn't that there aren't problems in families, but all the problems, all the pathologies that we associate in these areas are magnified by several orders of magnitude by not having stable families because it
and
just,
and it and it seems like this isn't something I discuss in my book at all. All the stuff is sort of related to the issues that I some of the issues that I bring up in my book, but a lot of this is kind of tangential, but it's still I think important to talk about. But you talk about the lack of cohesiveness in families, and yet haven't the major institutions in the Western world in the last 50 years or so just about done everything they can to wreck the family?
yeah. Uh, the more direct assault was on the black family with the Great Society. The white middle class was a tougher nut to crack, but they did it with mass marketing and suburbia, sexual revolution,
Yeah.
this is where you get with the music and all that. So, and you look into it, and this I think this dates way back. Oh, I think we can pin it back into the 50s with the development of the teenager and Life magazine promoting psychedelic drugs 10 years before the Summer of Love. So
Hmm.
they're preparing the culture for this stuff.
Hmm.
And it's what's astonishing to me is how some of this stuff can be so planned and so thought out. But
Right. I know some people have theorized along those lines. I don't know
yeah,
enough to know whether to what extent it was planned. And I mean, I guess that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, like how much does evil really know its
hmm
own trajectory? I mean, they maybe, they know they have certain needs, or they have certain, they come up with certain schemes that please them, and then they carry them out with brutal efficiency. But as for the ultimate end game, you know,
well, I
that's
mean, okay, where I think you could not have had the sexual revolution if you didn't have you needed the creation of suburbia and mass media,
hmm,
because all that was marketed. Um, because uh, America in the 40s and early 50s, before
hmm,
suburbia, you had these tight knit, cohesive ethnic neighborhoods. The
hmm,
Italian Catholic, Polish Catholic, German Catholic, um, and these neighbors were like I mentioned earlier, they were intentionally broken up. And so once you had this diaspora into suburbia, and so by this also coincides with the development of television,
Mm,
a huge mind control weapon. You know,
right.
so it's
But
hard.
again, was television invented to be that? I think that maybe some of the people you talk to would say something like, it was all their plan all along when they first came up with television. They wanted to,
Yeah,
wreck the family. But was that the case, or was it just sort of a?
I think there's evidence for it. Much evidence. I
I mean,
can't say enough for sure.
maybe that is the case. I would want to see more evidence
Oh
before I
yeah.
came to that
I mean, there's
those
something with
kinds of conclusions.
there are things like with the flicker rate. They're intentionally set to put you in what like
Hmm.
in a what is it, an alpha state or a beta? I forget which one they call it, uh but they rope you in with the sort of programming which is kind of wholesome, and this is what they call it.
Hmm.
Some people call this the Miley Cyrus trick or the Disney trick, you know,
Hmm.
where they track you with benign wholesome material. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, then they tart them up,
Yeah,
you know. The
that does seem to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of the ubiquitous thing with young female stars, that start out innocent and then all of a sudden,
Mm.
whoa, she's a slut now. I mean, that
Yeah.
it's like that's just so it's almost boring.
It's
In
it's
fact, it is boring.
it's the Disney program.
Yeah,
It's not-
maybe.
you know, but there is something to that. I mean, I think Alan Watt was talking about how in England in the 1950s or late 50s, there's a program to bring used TV sets in from the United States into the United Kingdom. And he said prior to these television sets that were portioned out, people used to meet. They'd have like events in the public square. Musical bands would play, and they'd have kids would be playing outside in the
Hmm.
summer evenings late until it got dark, and people were socializing, discussing things. And the moment those TVs came in, people stopped hanging out outside, and you could just walk around town and see the blue light in the
Right. Sure. That makes sense. I mean,
yeah.
there's something to that critique. On the other hand, I think television and I don't know, cinema and any other kind of form is just a form, and that you can do there can be and there have been artistically valid shows and movies and so forth. I wouldn't say that I would hesitate to say like fear this or be against this particular medium or think that this medium in itself is evil in itself.
Hmm.
I mean, even if there's evidence that it has had a lot of detrimental effects. So that's, I guess, a distinction or a caution that I would have about that kind of critique. Although, like I said, there's certainly at least something
Yeah,
to it.
you're not going to find a memo. You're not going to get that satisfaction. Uh,
Yeah.
create TV to corrupt the youth. You're not going to get that memo. But I mean, the interest in the media. I mean, just people have done research into the Princeton Radio Project. How they're the ones that were studying the effects of Orson Welles' broadcast, the Halloween Eve broadcast.
The War of the Worlds.
Yeah, War of the Worlds. And they took particular interest in the response to that.
Hmm.
And I can't. And
I'm sure. I mean,
yeah,
that can't be.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you would think that would be a real that would be something they would want to study. Like
yeah,
how credulous are the people out there? Can we convince them that there is an alien invasion just by having this cheesy radio show?
yeah.
And apparently it worked to some
Mhm.
degree. I guess there's some revisionist writings about that incident that suggest it maybe wasn't quite as dramatic as they said it was
But the
at first. But
the arts in general have always been an interest of the oligarchs. So they've never
right,
taken a laissez-faire approach to it. That goes back to the Greeks.
yeah,
They'd make people attend plays and they listen to the
yeah,
stories. And even the Bolsheviks had a train that ran with a movie camera. They'd travel around. Trotsky organized that. And of course,
yeah.
so
And there was but that can also be used for good, it seems, if it's in the hands of people who actually mean well.
yeah.
But
But
the
when
problem that's the there's the rub, I guess.
but we were
That's
talking
not
about
where it ends
our
up.
early discussion is how the psychopath, the reptilians,
Yes.
the ambitious ones, well, they're the ones that eventually get on top of all the political institutions, entertainment institutions, corporate institutions, and they're the ones determining our viewing. I saw a chart today about how much of what we consume in the media it's controlled by a handful of corporations
Yeah,
and a
heard that
handful of
too.
people. So by definition, a handful of people, and they interlock.
Hmm.
And they meet at Bilderberg, and they meet at
Yeah,
Davos, and they meet at Bohemian Grove. And they're not just, they're not having pissing contests or
yeah.
running through the woods or playing, card games. They're actually strategizing,
Hmm.
and that's the problem with these gatherings.
Yeah,
So
and they must have bought off. I mean, the fact that major media doesn't cover them, doesn't even want to go in and infiltrate in some way. And I mean, if they wanted to leak something, somebody would be able. I mean,
well,
if
David Rockefeller complimented for in that speech he
yeah,
gave.
right. I
I want to
remember.
thank you for,
Yeah,
and they don't go because they're the ones that attend. I mean,
yeah.
the elite. I mean, the editor, people who own the papers, whether it's the Grahams, or I guess she's long dead, but she used to go, I guess. But
Hmm.
Jeff Bezos, I think, goes, and he owns the Post now. He owns Amazon, and who's this other guy that funds the libertarians? Uh,
Oh, not the Koch brothers. Is that who you're?
yeah, the Koch
Oh,
brothers. I don't think they go to Bilderberg, but that's an example of an oligarchic family that controls
hmm.
the dialectic. They're the right wing
Right.
oligarch.
Yeah.
They're the
Right.
anti-Soros, and the people who
Right.
like Soros hate the Koch brothers.
Right.
Um, what's it? Peter Thiel.
Hmm.
He's the guy that gave a lot of money to the Ron Paul campaign, and a lot of libertarians get money from him, and
Oh.
but he's a Bilderberger.
Hmm.
So this is how and who's this guy Pierre Omidyar who's who signed up Glenn Greenwald? He's the PayPal guy.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so he's a Bilderberger too. And so you have these. That's how they pay off some of these. Control some of these alternative journalists, like Glenn Greenwald, who I understand may very well be compromised, according to
Mm.
Sibel Edmonds,
Mm.
with some pretty. He was involved in like gay porn stuff and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And
I know
so
he's gay,
yeah,
but
so but you get a deal. A good example, you get a deal. You're a journalist and you're hardly paying your rent, and someone throws $1 million at you and says you can report on this story, but you can't report here. It's very easy
yeah,
to rationalize that decision.
sure. You should. I would imagine. I can understand. I
Yeah,
mean, you got to
yeah,
take care of your family, or and
yeah.
whatever.
So, but
That
anyway,
makes
that
sense.
again. But I understand. I understand because some of these things are because it's hard to understand that these things could be that controlled. Um,
I mean, it's possible. Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying I flat out think it absolutely can't be true, because there are things that I guess maybe 5-10 years ago I would have thought, I would have dismissed, that now
I know exactly how you feel.
now I believe. 10 years ago I was not a truther at
Yeah.
all.
Well, like this
Um,
whole Action of Mockingbird, where you have the CIA, William Colby, 1975, saying that 400 top journalists. I mean, are there? Think about it, 400. I mean, think about the top. That's probably
yeah.
are on our pay. On our
Did
pay.
did he say that, like, on the record? Is that actually,
Yeah. Then he
was
went
it?
in an executive session or something. We get in the details. You can watch it
Oh,
on YouTube. But
really?
Mockingbird, and you don't have to control each report. You just have to have the editors and the owners of the
Hmm.
paper, and the people that own the paper are all connected into intelligence. It's all part of the Georgetown set. They all go to the same parties. Like Katharine Graham, her brother, and her husband Phil Graham. He was good friends with what's his name? The guy who did the Mighty Wurlitzer.
Mm.
He The Mighty Wurlitzer was a term of how you could play America just to control the media.
Oh, okay.
Name fails my memory fails.
This is all out of DC. I guess
Yeah,
this is the morass in the
yeah,
midst of which you dwell.
yeah. Well, and yeah, and of course we got to realize that CBS, ABC all developed out of OSS and OWI during the World War II.
Hmm.
William Perley, Sarnoff, they were all OSS agents, intelligence agents. And a
Mm.
lot of these people who were involved in Office of War Information, War Propaganda, and Intelligence after the war, what are you going to do? You went into media and advertising. And
Right.
there's a reason why advertising and intelligence is like a revolving door, because it's all about mind control and manipulation.
Right. And if you're a writer, I mean,
Yeah,
that's a, you're looking for someone who will pay. That's
yeah.
got to be
I think
a temptation.
Ed Lansdale was an ad man.
Hmm.
He was the one that came up with these neat ideas like how to suppress the Philippines,
Mm.
and so Ed Lansdale, so
Is it true that George Orwell, did he do something for British intelligence during the war?
Yeah, well, he had connect. Yeah, he was. He was involved in British intelligence. He was.
Was he the one? Did I remember hearing this a long time ago. Maybe you. I mean, you seem like you know about this kind of stuff. Did he? Is he the one who came up with the idea that spreading the rumor that Hitler had only one testicle?
That might be what's his name? James Bond guy.
Oh, Ian Fleming.
Ian Fleming. I
Okay.
think that might be Ian Fleming,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. Well, yeah, you get a lot of that stuff with a lot of this stuff. Where I just read an article today talking about how people talk about the Third Reich and the occult. A lot of it is just based on wartime propaganda.
Hmm.
Because they get a few nuggets and they say that Hitler was obsessed with the occult. This because that's how you demonize the Third Reich and the Nazis.
Yeah.
Not as if you don't have enough material, you got to do that. But
Yeah. Right.
but again, this is like kind of pop history stuff where
Right.
Hitler had made a pact with the devil and that sort of stuff,
Hmm.
as if the British establishment hadn't made its own pact with the devil.
Right.
It's like,
Well, we're up to plenty of devilish
yeah,
things
exactly.
themselves.
It's like, yeah, they're not the only guy. Let's face it, he wasn't the only one trying to build an empire. Come on.
No. No. Not at
It's
all.
like where's the George Collins joke? He was talking about World War II. He says, "Yeah, we went to World War II and fought the Japanese and the Germans because they were trying to take over the world." He goes, "No way, man. That's what our job is. Don't you try to.
That's our world,
That's
man.
our world, man." The George Collins joke.
Yeah.
It's funny, but again, you alt right. You write for or your website is alternative right.
Hmm.
And
Alternative right.blogspot.com, where you just type in alternative right
how
and
would you
it'll come up.
define alternative right, and where do you figure in the alternative right?
Well, I would define the alternative right as a broad conglomeration of people with various ideas and ideologies and perspectives with a common enemy, and that enemy is, what do we call it? Cultural Marxism, political correctness, uh, SJW, tyranny, uh, feminism, uh, uh, gender dimorphism, all these kind of trendy kinds of ideologies and enforced perspectives that are out there. The alternative right, there's a lot of there's a lot of honest to God, quote unquote, diversity among the alternative right. There are, it. I think that the stereotype
Is diversity its strength?
in this case, yes. Ironically enough, diversity is our strength. Um, because we have to fight a war on many fronts against this juggernaut enemy that's so powerful right now, and so I'm happy to ally myself with these other people in the alternative right, even if there are some major philosophical, ideological, theological differences that I might have with them, because it's just a strategic thing. We're up against a common foe, and it would be foolish to be to overlook that fact. That's not to say we can't criticize each other in various ways. I'm not saying that one doesn't criticize a fellow alternative rightist for this, that, or the other thing, because I've done it many times myself. But it's the alternative right. It seems to be over the last year or so, it seems to have really caught on. Although probably I'm saying that, but I'm sure there's tons and tons of people out there who just have never heard it before. Maybe not people listening to this podcast, but it's still I wouldn't say a major force out there, but it's definitely uh, becoming more noticeably more conspicuous of late, and getting some notice from these enemies that I think maybe to a large extent having to do with the Donald Trump campaign, I'm not a Donald Trump partisan myself, although I enjoy seeing seeing the havoc that he wreaks among the establishment left and the establishment right.
What
So,
did you think of Giselle Panel's endorsement?
um, well, I don't know. It doesn't mean that much to me one way or the other, I
I'm gonna
guess.
kick ISIS ass. Was it kick ISIS ass or something?
I don't know. I didn't see the press conference. I mean, I've heard a lot about it.
Did you hear?
Um,
Was it Patrick Henningson's take on that, or
no.
he did a thing? I don't know if he was tweeting himself or he was copying a tweet he got, but it said, "Here we have a politician turned reality star
Oh,
endorsing a reality star turned politician."
yeah, that's right. I do remember that.
I thought that was good. But go ahead. I'm sorry. What was
Well, yeah, I
off on
think
a
it's
Donald Trump
I
thing?
think the Trump campaign has given it some has shown some light on the alt-right scene to a degree. I don't even know if Trump himself, if you asked him about the alternative right, he probably wouldn't know what it was. But people in the media do, pundits do. It's getting some notice from some uh, you know powerful circles, or certain mainstream uh, uh, sources are you know places like Weekly Standard, Daily Beast, uh, other websites. I don't know, Salon. It seems like, if I'm not mistaken, and a couple, and some other places that are, kind of these establishment type sites, whether of the center right or the center left, have written things about the alternative right lately, noticed it in one way or another, and like I said, I think a lot of it probably has to do with the Trump campaign, and specifically, it's really peculiar to me. I mean, a year ago, nobody was talking about Donald Trump as some kind of somebody who was going to be the man who would vanquish cultural Marxism from America. Um, Nobody was that kind of idea was not on anybody's mind. And somehow, over the last few months, this guy who's been in the public eye for decades, and who's well known as an entrepreneur and as this sort of you know bold, brash kind of New York character who speaks his mind and has a big ego, and maybe is kind of funny, but you know but presidential material. you know I don't think anybody would have thought that, and yet suddenly he pushes certain buttons and says certain things, and you know uh, I guess you've got to hand it to him as a politician. He's seems to have he seems to know what he's doing, and seems to have done a masterful job in many ways. That's not me endorsing him. It's just me noticing,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean, I'm hardly the only one who's noticed. Um, so I think that him speaking out about uh, illegal immigration in some way shone a light, or had a kind of ripple effect uh, that resulted in this alt-right scene that I'm a part of getting more notice and more play, and people just sort of looking around and saying, "Hey, what's this?" And either writing these absurdly shrill, kind of dismissive screeds, which, I mean, the type that I'm talking about. Some of them have written things like that. Others have, been more reasonable and fair and said, "Well, what are they all about? What is this thing?" And But it has gotten more notice lately. And again, there is a lot of it's a disparate group, um, and I am maybe one of the few traditionalist Catholics among the alternative right, but we are not. It's not unheard of uh, to have this kind of perspective and be an alt rightist. There are also, I don't know, Nietzschean, right-wing Nietzscheans and white nationalists and other and pagans and um, race realists, they would call themselves, and yes, probably some honest to goodness National Socialists, or neo Nazis. They would just I gather you're not supposed to call a Nazi, or that's like uh, that's thought of as insulting.
Yeah, it's a National Socialist, I think is
National Social. I don't. I mean,
that's the politically correct term to call a
that's
Nazi.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I always think, I live in the South, and there's some people who are, Southern partisans who say it's the war between the states. It's not the Civil War. And
Yeah,
I always think to myself, if it was politically correct to be, sympathetic to the Southern cause, that would be the kind of thing that these scolds, these annoying scolds who tell us, you know, to call girls women and to call blacks African Americans
yeah,
and blah blah blah. They would be on us for saying no, don't say the Civil War. It's the war of Southern independence, or the war between the states.
yeah.
But since it's politically correct to bash the South, then that of course doesn't get mentioned, or
Hmm.
that's not a doesn't play.
But one of the thing is, one thing I'm kind of soured on electoral politics, particularly at the national level.
Oh, me too.
I think the United States, as it's currently configured, is simply too big and corrupt, and
Yeah.
it's just 535 or so people can't govern the country with 220 million people. You know, and he can't be as centralized as it is without too much tension and corruption. It's simply
Right.
it is not tenable. It's
A lot of chicanery and mischief.
Yeah, and that's why under its original design, perhaps it was feasible, perhaps.
Hmm.
But now we have this imperial government in Washington D.C., this Leviathan state, which acknowledges no limitations on its powers. And but so uh, but again, when you talk about the alternative right, to me, I see it sort of a cultural movement where, to the extent that it's pre-political, and
Uh-huh.
that way they can make you borrow borrow a lesson from the cultural Marxist, where you change the culture first,
Hmm.
and then the politics falls into your lap. Now,
Yeah.
the
And
only
it is
yeah,
definitely the counterculture
yeah,
today. I mean, they talk about the
and
counterculture of the '60s.
it might be a genuine counterculture, but I do think much like the
Yeah.
counterculture in the '60s was co-opted, I think this can be co-opted too, because you can get these false
Oh yeah.
dialectics going, and you can get one thing that concerns me, because I understand these people have real grievances and concerns, and they're not saying that they're not genuine.
Hmm.
I'm not calling them shills or agents, although I think we've had COINTELPRO, we've
Sure.
had Operation Chaos, and we've had uh, you know government officials talking about cognitive infiltration. So
Hmm.
we can only assume that this is going on, because the action is in the reaction,
Hmm.
um, and certain groups, certain interests or oligarchic interests will thrive if you can create division among
Sure.
the populace. And when you talk about things like white nationalism, and where I study ethnicity in the past and all that, in the South there was whiteness, but in the North there wasn't. There was Italians, there were Germans, there were Poles.
Right.
So what really matters, as it's like Michael Jones makes this point, is when he's talked to David Duke, is it's not a question of whiteness, it's a question of
Hmm.
ethnicity, and it's a cultural issue. And the problem is that what we consider white America was a product of suburbia, which was a social engineering scheme. The whole idea was
Hmm.
to create that bland,
Hmm.
ambiguous
Hmm.
white,
Deracinated whiteness,
exactly
almost,
deracinated white.
which seems like a contradiction in terms, but
Yeah, but it's this the deracinated people went into the suburbs, and once they're
maybe de-ethnicize also would be.
de-ethnicize, and once that they're cut off from their roots, they can be subjected to all the psychological warfare that the corporations, the intelligence agencies, the foundations, and universities
Hmm.
were to put on them.
Hmm.
And this is where we're discussing about mass media and mass production, the consumerist culture, where you create this this system of debt infused consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what people can easily be controlled. And so I don't know if there's a legitimate appeal to whiteness per se, whereas I do want to talk about the generalized European culture that became American culture.
Mm-hmm.
So and there is an anti-whiteness in the media that is
Yes.
indisputable. And there's concerns about interracial marriage. It used to be called miscegenation.
Mm-hmm.
Concerns about that is where most people, I think, are concerned with it to the extent that it's being forced down their throats,
Yes.
as opposed to being tolerant of it and being recognized that each individual has a right to fall in love with whomever they want, assuming it's the opposite sex.
Yes.
Not get on that, but I'm
Exactly.
saying married with it,
Yeah.
as long as they're
That's
not
my
a close relative. That's the law, right?
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. As long as they're over the age of consent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my position
Yeah.
on mixed marriage. I don't I don't see it as something universally wrong, as some universal taboo, the way that many in the alt-right
Yeah.
do. But I do have a problem with it being propagandized,
Yeah.
which it undoubtedly is.
If you watch commercials, TV shows,
Yeah.
there is for car ads. I started watching a car ad, and every couple in the ad was a mixed race couple.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is that?
I mean, that certainly doesn't reflect reality. I mean,
It's
there
not
are more
reality.
mixed race couples than there used to be, but
Yeah.
not to that proportion at all.
Like attracts like.
Yeah.
You watch certain television shows. This is being promoted, and this is how it's done in the culture. And if you don't think the culture, people who make culture aren't pushing an agenda with their product, then you're naive.
Yes.
So I mean that's one of the difference. When you have the French President Sarkozy actually suggested mandating. He was actually concerned about the fact that whites were marrying whites in France, and that the law has to be changed to change that. Now, how do you make
Really?
people? Yeah, this was a couple of years ago, Sarkozy.
Huh.
So I mean, and this that only feeds suspicions because Sarkozy is Jewish,
Right.
and the
it
people
doesn't do much for the
exactly, and the people in
the
Hollywood in the movies,
yeah.
it's so that and so this is it's a legitimate concern.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's one of these things where it's easy to promote that, then exploit the reaction.
Yeah, well, that's what I wonder if they're doing. That's what I wonder if that's part of what their goal is now. I mean, I guess when we're talking about the migrant
Mm-hmm.
crisis, if that's part of the idea is to create division and then work some nefarious scheme out of the chaos that they create
Mm-hmm.
through this division. That's a good question. And whether so your concern is that the alternative right is maybe being steered, is being used as part of this kind of evil dialectic that they're trying to, or this kind of conflict that they're stirring or fomenting.
Well, I think it would be naive to if it gets any political traction that it wouldn't be manipulated to some extent.
Right. Yes.
The same way that the conservative movement was back in the 80s. I think it was largely infiltrated. Of course, you had the neoconservatives, which were largely Trotskyites, Jewish Trotskyites, who pursuing an Israeli revolutionary agenda by co-opting the Republican Party, and they've largely taken over. I mean, a good example. I don't think I have a quote I was reading by. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Elias Davidson, who is Jewish, but he's what they call a self-hating Jew.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, and this is what he says. Elias Davidson. He says, as a Jew myself, but opposed to Zionism, I need no encouragement from Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad to observe that what should be obvious to the blatant eye, namely that Jews effectively rule U.S. foreign policy and thus determine to a great extent the conduct of most countries. So it is with this proposition that Jews control the world. Surely they do not control every single action. Surely it does not mean that every Jew participates in the control, but for all practical purposes, the proposition holds. And that's that's Elias Davidson saying that, and they've largely been able to infiltrate and dominate, or at least severely manipulate U.S. foreign policy. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
at the very least. And so, as an identifiable political group, the Jews. You've had a few podcasts talk about the Jews. You can't
Yeah.
say the Jews without being called anti-Semite.
Right.
But the same. I'm using the term the same way you say the Germans or the Japanese.
Right.
Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. You know,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know, you know. But so there is Zionism is a reality. The APAC is a reality.
Sure. Jewish power
Jewish
is a thing.
is a thing that we must deal with and contend with. We're all forced to contend with it, and they should be held accountable for the policies that wherever actions they're involved in or their policies they're proposing.
Yeah.
And it is a concern when you have so many high up in government who are supposedly dual citizens. At least have that option.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. Is that a unique? Is that something that only that Israelis are able to do that other citizens can't? Because I've heard a lot of I've heard of a lot of Jewish Americans who are dual citizens
mhm.
of Israel, but I haven't heard that discussed much of any other country.
I don't know if that's in the law, other this only because you have this notion. Remember, Israel is as an ethnic state.
Yeah.
And that's another thing: is it a religion or is it an ethnicity? And they seem to play both ends when it suits them.
Hmm.
And that's
Well, most of them aren't very religious.
no,
Most of the
but
ones we're talking about right
no,
now.
uh, uh, but they're very you know you could say tribal oriented though.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure. Oh, yes.
and of course, with the existence of an Israeli state, of a Zionist state, um,
Right.
the fact that it is and you have certain Hollywood moguls who are proud agents of the Israeli state, who was like Arnold Milchan, who got an
Hmm.
award from Israel for helping develop its nuclear program, engaging in espionage against the United States government.
Hmm.
And so and they also it's remember they also they a lot of the wealthy billionaires are able to fund a lot of operations overseas, off the books operations for the benefit of the Israeli state.
Hmm.
So that's a big problem right there. But yeah, it's not something new. I remember if you do research during World War II, you had the English, the British over here, with the British security, the coordination,
Hmm.
with William Stevenson, our man Intrepid, and the British had co-opted and kind of taken over U.S. foreign policy leading up to World War II to get us into the war. They were feeding false intelligence to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and of course the Eastern Seaboard was always Anglophile anyway. Much to the
Hmm.
chagrin of a lot of the Germans and Irish and who,
Right.
who went overseas to go fight for behalf of the British Empire.
Hmm.
So this type of infiltration isn't new. It's what George Washington warned us about, I guess, in his farewell
Right.
address.
Entangling alliances.
So I don't think it's wrong to hold Jews or the Israeli state accountable for that. It's just
Sure.
treating them like would anyone else. So
Yeah.
uh,
Definitely. And I mean, I'm kind of, I guess, as a traditionalist Catholic with a universal morality, uh, I am, maybe I may be one of the more liberal of the alt right in this regard. You know, I I'm not I'm just I'm completely in agreement with everything you're saying about noting uh, the phenomenon of uh, Jewish power and noting where there's maybe a disproportionate representation um, of Jewish influence or what have you in various fields, and noticing that because it's the truth and pointing it out and asking what some of the consequences of this might be. In that sense, even saying those kinds of things is to the mainstream is very very dicey. But on the alt right, I think I may be more. I mean, there are some people with a much more of a white tribalist uh, perspective and seeing Jews as just thoroughgoing infiltrators And
Well, that's it's such a crude outlook on things.
yeah,
'Cause
I agree.
I mean, again, that's why it's different. You're identifying a political grouping, and then you have to speak in generalities just to have a conversation.
Right.
But that's not how. I mean, a good example. I would say that there is a problem to the extent that most Jews in America identify themselves as pro-Zionist, and that is a problem. But it's a problem in their point of view and how they look. It's not a problem in their biological makeup.
Right.
So
It's a cultural issue,
yeah,
cultural matter.
or a
And
question about
being a Zion, I mean, if you call yourself a Zionist, if you're a Jew and you call yourself a Zionist, I mean, doesn't that word have different meanings to different people? I mean, couldn't one Jew saying he's a Zionist, couldn't that mean to him that he just believes that his people should have a homeland?
mhm.
Um, where I mean, I know, and for others, it means something much more nefarious. I mean, it seems like it can get sort of complex.
Mhm. But it's interesting. Zionism itself, the Zionists, the Theodor Herzls, the Chaim Weizmanns, the people, the founders of the Israeli state, as you could say, although he
Yes.
died before it was founded. But um, Chaim Weizmann actually said that anti-Semitism is not it's not a dysfunction. It's not a psychological problem. It's not even wrong. It's natural, and therefore that's why they need the Zionist state.
Mm.
Okay, so what their problem was if the societies that were too tolerant, where they were assimilating,
Hmm.
so they wanted they didn't like assimilation. They didn't
They
like
wanted a place
tolerance.
where Jews could be Jews and
Exactly.
not be tempted
Hmm.
into becoming something that they aren't, that
And
they ought not be
and
from his perspective.
yeah, and it's almost like the Jewish leadership wants you know wants to create problems because that empowers the Jewish leadership. There's a there's a there,
Yeah.
there's a symbiotic relationship there between anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism. There was a
Huh.
symbiotic relationship between the SS and the Zionists, and
Hmm.
that bore fruit
That's right.
in the transfer
That's true.
agreement. And they both wanted they both wanted Jews out of Germany.
Yeah.
you know,
And there was going to be a Jewish homeland in
yeah,
Madagascar, right? Wasn't
yeah,
that the
yeah.
what they were talking about for a little
There's some
while?
discussion about that. But what they didn't like is they couldn't get them to leave Europe until, of course, the unpleasantness that we call the Second World War.
Yeah.
Um, so again, they much of much of the problem that people have is they only see the reaction, they don't see the action that caused the reaction. Okay,
Yeah.
and so that's why historically they've been kicked out of a couple hundred countries. There's always some sort of problem. Now there's a lot of it's a very complex history because often that's local nobility using the Jews as front men.
Right.
Then the front men, and of course, then it happens is the general population blames all the Jews. And
Yeah.
I think there's a
Sure.
saying that goes, "The Trotskys make the revolution, the Bronsteins pay for it."
Hmm.
You know. So
Hmm.
again, unfortunately, people who, the Cossack who's being overtaxed by the Jewish tax farmer isn't going to make those distinctions when he goes into a Jewish village and slaughters it. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what you're getting in some of these cases. So, but it's just one of those things where again they need the tension because with the tension you get group cohesion.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
it's ruled by fear, and guess what? I guess they may be particularly good at it, but they're not the only ones doing it.
But I see a kind of interesting and ironic parallel amongst what some white nationalists are saying now about the migrant crisis,
Hmm.
about how this is creating, this crisis is creating more cohesion among whites, uh, and so it's almost like it's a good thing, because whites are becoming racially conscious, and uh, so it seems like it's similar to what you're saying, the same dynamic of what you're saying here with
Well, because I think a lot of the critique, and I think the Kevin McDonald critique about
right.
high trust societies, where they don't really identify as a
Yeah.
group, whereas like a Jewish minority will identify as a group, as a cohesive group,
Yes. Right.
and they're weak, and so they're easy to be infiltrated and undermined, and they have the best of intentions and all that. There's something to that, I think. I've read his
Hmm.
book Culture Critique, and there is
Right.
something definitely to that, and the idea of
We
like,
had we had Kevin McDonald on a podcast not too
oh,
long ago
okay.
for alternative right. So yeah.
And there is an element to the I mean, I don't get into we're bashing Jews now,
Right,
but
right.
there is an element of subversiveness and
Hmm.
revolutionary spirit to the Jews that have existed. Some say going back to to when they rejected the Christ.
And that's I
Yeah,
know part of E. Michael Jones's
yeah,
whole
it's
thesis.
yeah the revolutionary spirit, and so
Yeah.
and then there's also the conversos, the Morano, controversy where they became fake converts,
Hmm.
and that established tradition of sort of a idea of mendacity and
Right.
excuse so they could infiltrate certain area. So this forms the culture, and basically it's a coping survival strategy,
Yeah.
you know. So, but they guess they don't know how to turn it off, and then eventually there's a reaction, and you get these
Yeah.
reactions throughout history. So
Yeah.
that's his thesis there.
Hmm.
But like I said, is there a Jewish problem? Yeah, there's a Jewish problem. There's also a Christian Zionist problem, an evangelical problem, because you have people with, I think, mistaken outlooks on things.
Hmm.
So you know,
Yeah. No question.
but it's very difficult because you can't. Ever since the '70s, particularly since World War II, particularly since the '70s, because of the Holocaust thing, you can't criticize them because immediately you criticize them,
Yeah.
you're accused of being anti-Semitic, and then you're one step away from a pogrom, and that's
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Criticizing Jews becomes akin to being some brutal guard at a concentration
yeah.
camp. Just wiping them out left and right. I mean that it.
And I mean, you can have the Frankfurt School, which is some people have described, you know, uh, as basically it's a synagogue, intellectual synagogue. They described it, but
Hmm.
people like Herbert Marcuse
Right.
or Wilhelm Reich, um, and these guys, they can critique and undermine Christian society,
Yeah.
but Christians can't critique Jewish society. So I
It
mean,
seems to me that everybody should be able to critique anybody else. I
exactly,
mean,
yeah.
you
And,
know.
and I mean to say that the Jews have faults, I'm merely saying that they're human beings.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm trying to
Exactly.
meet them on in level playing field here. That holding them account, I hold them accountable for their cultural products. They do dominate Hollywood, and I
Yeah.
do think that subversive revolutionary spirit imbues what they produce in the media.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that's a reason for that they so this again it's just a criticism, and then you
Sure.
should be able to face the criticism without accusing you, pointing a finger. I'm not trying to we're not trying to put you haul you off to a concentration camp just by criticizing you.
Yeah, and also being aware that that it's not a monolithic thing,
Yes.
and there are plenty of Jews out there who just wake up and go to their jobs and come home and watch TV
Yeah,
and just live like normal schlubs,
they
and
just want to go to work and be not bothered and go home. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's
they're
probably
not
most of
really they're not part of
them.
they're not scheming and power hungry and
And
so that's what I think. There's this kind of perspective among some on the alternative right, um, that tends to demonize Jewry. Let's just say
yeah,
to a degree that I find uh, well irritating.
yeah.
So I've criticized it myself from
Well,
time to time.
yeah. There's a big difference between Paul Gottfried and Abe
Hmm.
Foxman.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
and so there's a big difference between that, So, and we could also, there's nothing
Big
wrong.
difference between Gloria Steinem and Saint Edith Stein,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly. That's right. Gloria Steinem. Oh, yeah, by the way, Gloria Steinem, another CIA asset, by the way. But
Right, exactly.
so that's, but yeah, 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 and and we can also make fun of our idiosyncrasies and
Yeah, sure.
and our foibles and our way. And so, I mean, I just
Yeah.
saw a thing with that guy Seth Meyers, who I'm going to
Hmm.
assume is he Jewish?
I mean, it's weird. I don't know.
Meyer.
His last name doesn't sound Jewish, but his first name does.
Okay,
So
but
I'm
I
not
just
sure.
he had a thing called making fun of Boston, and it's a combination of making fun of Boston accents and Boston culture, and
Right.
movies about Boston. It's actually
Yeah.
very funny. But if I were really a hypersensitive Catholic from the Boston
Uh-huh.
area, Hey, that's an anti-Catholic. You're making fun of my culture.
Right,
You
right.
know? So,
A
but
Catholic League, if you were Catholic League type
yeah, the cat.
person.
Yeah, go out and yeah. So, well, listen, we're running short on time. I told you I'd let you go. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you have other plans. So, anything else you want to say? Anything we didn't get to, or
No, I mean it's been a fun, wide-ranging conversation,
yeah,
and just to draw attention back to my book, just for a second. Uh, Conspiracy, Compliance, Control, and Defiance is the title, and you can find it on Amazon. It's available for, I think, a reasonable price on Kindle or paperback in those two formats. And you can find excerpts of it if you want to try before you buy. You can look up the excerpts that I've got posted at the Alternative Rights site. One of them is called "Slaves to Our Programming," and there's also one called "Our Reptilian Rulers." Actually, there's two called "Our Reptilian Rulers." There's "Our Reptilian Rulers" and then "Our Reptilian Rulers Part 2. You can find all those at the Alternative Rights site, alternative-right.blogspot.com, or just type in Alternative Right website, or maybe my name, and that'll bring it up. I also have a SoundCloud page. I'll wrap up this self promotion in a second, but I just want to say a few things about where to find stuff relating to my book. Where on my SoundCloud page, I have audio readings of a couple of passages uh, from Conspiracy, Compliance, Control, and Defiance, as well as audio readings from other books of mine, and also I have a regular or semi-regular podcast that I do that's posted there, and you can find that by just typing Andy Nowicki SoundCloud, or go to SoundCloud, and my SoundCloud name is JNOW1101, which I really should get around to changing, but I haven't done that yet. But I think you can find it just by, again, typing in my name and SoundCloud. So
that also carries your nameless podcast too, right?
yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That's where my nameless podcast can be found, which is also linked to at Alternative Right. So just type in my name and you'll get there somehow, one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Listen, I want to thank you for coming on the show, spending so much time with me to talk about these things.
Yeah,
And
it's been fun. I appreciate you having me on.
we'll talk again soon. And good luck with the book. And how often do you do your podcast?
Oh, well, I have my regular the Nameless podcast,
Uh-huh.
which I do maybe once, a week and a half or 2 weeks, something like that. And I also sometimes Colin and I do an Alternative Right podcast together.
Uh-huh.
Um, and those have been more sporadic lately, but
Yeah, I know how
you
that
know,
goes. Yeah. So
yeah, but we haven't quit doing them. We just we sort of do them when something comes up and interests us to talk about.
mhm.
And
Okay.
sometimes we have guests. Um, yeah. So thank you very much for having me on.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Thanks.